going to hear today some inspiring words from the family about our beloved Jeanne. And it's traditional, of course, to recite some prayers at this time before we begin the eulogies. And of course, in Scripture, we know some of the great verses begin with Mizmor, a prayer, like Mizmor LaDavid, a prayer of David, the Lord is my shepherd. It's always the word Mizmor. Mizmor is a zemer. Zemer is the Hebrew word for a song that praises the Almighty, that praises God. And it's no coincidence Campbell, Jeanne's granddaughter, is part of Hazamir, the well-known nationwide choral groups that sing scripture songs around the country and glorify God through song. And so we're also going to say some prayers. I'm going to say the prayer in Hebrew and translate it in English. Of course, you may follow along. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai roi, lo echzor benos teshe yarbitzeni Almei menuchos yinaleini nafshi shovev yancheni v'maglei tzedek leman shimo Kam ki elech b'geit almoves lo iraro ki ato imodi shivtecha umeshantecha hema yinachamuni Taroich lefanai shulchan neged soriroi Tishanto vashemen roshi kosi revaya Ach tov v'chesed yerdefuni kol yemei chayai v'shavti b'beis Adonai liorech yamim. A song of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. God causes me to lie down in lush pastures. God leads me beside tranquil waters. God restores my soul and guides me in righteous paths for God's name's sake. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your scepter and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in full view of my adversaries. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. May only goodness and kindness pursue me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for length of days. Eishes chayil miyimtza verachov mipnei nemichra botach balev bayalo v'shalom lo yechsor Gimol asu toiv v'lo ero kol yemei chayeho dorshot tzemer ufishtim vatas b'chefetz kapeho Tama ki toiv sachra lo yichbe balayla nehra Yadeha shilcha bakishor v'chapeha tamchu v'alech kapa paseleyani v'yadeha shilcha lehevyon lo sira levesa misheleg kicha beisa lavashanim Piha pascha v'chachma v'soras chesed al lishonot Sophia halichos beisa v'lechem atzlus lo sochel Kamu v'nei v'yashruha ba'lo v'yehalelo Rabbos panos asechayil v'yaralis al kulahana Sheker hachen Behevel hayofi Isha yiras Adonai Hisis halal tenula Mi priyadeha V'yehaleluha Basharim mahaseho A woman of valor who can find, she is more precious than pearls. Her husband places his trust in her, and so she profits. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She seeks out wool and flax, and cheerfully does the work of her hands. She is like a merchant's vessel bringing sustenance from afar. She arises while it is yet nighttime, giving food to her household, and a portion to her workers. She envisions a field and acquires it, and plants a vineyard with the fruit of her labors. She invests herself with strength and makes her arms powerful. She discerns that her enterprise is profitable, so her light does not go out at night. She stretches out her hands to the machine as her palms hold the spindle. She opens her palms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. She has no fear of snow, for all her household is dressed in fine clothing. Luxurious bedspreads she fashions, linen and wool, colored in lavender are her clothing. Distinctive in the assembly is her husband, where he sits with the elders of the land. She makes a cloak to sell, supplies the merchants with belts. She is robed in strength and dignity, and joyfully awaits the future. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and a lesson of kindness is on her tongue. She looks after her household and never tastes the bread of laziness. Her children arise and praise her, her husband, and he lauds her. Many women have excelled, but you excel them all. Grace is elusive and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears God, she shall be praised. Give her the fruits of her hand, and let her be praised in the gates by her very own deeds. And so as we come here today to pay tribute and honor to Jeanne for all that she meant to us, our community, our Menorah Park, Cleveland, New York, the world, that she did travel. So we call upon some family members to enlighten us and share stories with us and help us to grieve together and to attach to her memory forever. We call upon her son Tom to share a few words. Tom will be followed by his aunt and then by his brother.
Hi, and I firstly want to thank everyone for coming. Greatly appreciative. Thank you, Rabbi. I'm going to speak to 4 themes about my mother that were very prominent in my life and that she instilled in me, or the themes being courage, perseverance, artistry, and food. in no particular order. But if my mom had her druthers, I would start with food. But I would prefer to start with the courage. My brother and I traveled many places as children, and it led us on several adventures. And what we did wind up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, living with the Wechslers after, and I appreciate you both coming in today. Thank you, Larry and Phyllis. But at one point, my mother was a lifelong actress, and I call it, when people ask me about acting, because I did some acting in films and such, people often ask me about what it takes to be an actor or what should I do. I tell some people are just simply born thespians, and I'm not one. I did it for the money. And my mother was a born thespian. She was an artist, and way before it was probably common, my mother went to the University of Wisconsin to study theater, and then she wound up at Case Western back here, and upon getting her degree, did a lot of plays and all sorts of things. But my mom always had the brass ring in her purview. And because she had the brass ring in her purview, my brother and I were also in the purview of the brass ring, because we didn't think it was something unreachable. It takes great courage for someone at 1950 or whatever to go to the university. If you've ever been to Wisconsin, first of all, I visited that school, and I knew in 5 minutes. It's very chilly there. But my mother did attend that. And so ultimately, my mother starred in many shows. She's here in Cleveland and then in Pittsburgh, where there was this place called the White Barn Theater. So I grew up, as you're sitting now, watching my mother as a 10-year-old boy or younger on stage being directed. She was very talented, truly talented, and she was gifted particularly at comedy. And I think some of the people that got to know her at Menor Park know that she never lost the comedic component to her personality. But ultimately, in our journeys, my mom took me. Thank you for taking me, Mom, really, because I am forever grateful that my mother had the courage to move to New York City, ultimately to pursue her ambitions of being on Broadway. And because she had that courage, I had to go to New York, because she was my mom. And I arrived, I was 13 years old. I remember vividly the first night arriving in Manhattan. I'd never really been in Manhattan. And the pizza in Pittsburgh, that's okay? It's all right. I play. Hello. Anyway, the first evening I arrived, I remember being in our New York kitchen, a little New York, straight kitchen. My mother said, "Tommy, you're all prepared to start your new private school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan." That was a lot to look forward to, and a lot of transition for me. You can imagine sort of trying to assimilate to New York City. She said I also was good enough to get you a job. I said, "What?" She said, "I got you a job." I go, "Mom, I'm 13. But she was nice enough. And so I did spend the first year. If anyone remembers how the New York Times, Sunday Times was this thick, I put together 1,000 of those every weekend for $30 and really good rice pudding at a luncheonette in New York. My mom always made sure she was helpful in me finding employment. Once she walked into a restaurant, a very posh New York restaurant, and I know nothing about, at the time I had never really waited tables, and she told on my behalf that I could do so. So I then became a New York waiter that knew nothing about liquor, and but I thank her for all the employment. What I really wanted to speak to was the years I was in New York with my mother. They were just her and I. My brother had gone on to Duke at the time, and so for these very important formative years of my life, my mother and I became quite connected, quite close. And one of the things that I saw in her, and she often reiterated to me, was about perseverance. And I used to cue my mother, that's a word used to memorize her lines for these plays. My mother auditioned for Neil Simon personally several times. She was very good at these Neil Simon plays. And she was, it was between her and two very famous actresses to win the role of Blanche in a play called Broadway Bound. And although I did cue her, we worked very hard. She was down to her and the other two. She didn't get it. But ultimately, my mother was cast in a play called Animals, and she appeared on Broadway. And I was lucky enough to be there for all the previews and opening night. And I can't tell you, I sat in the front row. So when I say I had a front row view to my mother's life, I mean it literally, since I was a child. And I was so proud of her. And I can tell you that Broadway was not too big for my mom. She was just as good on Broadway as she ever was. She was a true artist. And because of that, ultimately my brother and I knew that artistry was something you could pursue, something that you could build a life around. I also can tell you that had she not had the courage to go to New York, I don't know where I would have ever had that. And once a person like Campbell now lives in New York and is pursuing acting, once you live there, it expands your world, and I'm forever grateful for the expansive world that my mother showed my brother and I. It is the greatest gift she ever gave me, was to see the world as a big place. And the second thing was perseverance. I watched her go from audition to audition. It was amazing how my mother got an apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. I can't tell you how. This is a different Manhattan in 1978. But she did it, and then she did make it to Broadway. And then I want to speak just about food for a moment, if I might. My mother liked food. Is that a secret to anybody? My mother liked food a great deal, but here's the best part. My grandma Gert, Barbara, my mother's sister right there, and we all here, we're a close pack here of cousins and Kuzners. Grandma Gert was an awesome cook, and luckily my mom learned how to cook from her. And I learned how to cook from my mom. I was her sous chef. So in New York City, I would chop the broccoli for all of our walk meals, and I cook to this day, but my mom was a superb cook, and she did like food. So she liked art, and I mean and high art. She traveled the world. So my gratitude is that I get to live. I've lived in LA for 16 years. I currently live in Pittsburgh. I also lived in New York for 15, 16 years, and I will live again, hopefully back again. But I'm forever grateful that she gave me that expansive view on the world. And I want to close by thanking just a few people. Specifically, I'd like to thank everybody at Menorah Park, where the rabbi works. I cannot tell you the journey we have had. If anybody's ever, I'm sure that many in the room have known dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and it's a slow, we call it the long goodbye. And we had it wonderfully, because it was so long, once, with the great help of my brother and Natalie, my sister-in-law, and my father is here today. Thank you for coming, and Bonnie. My mom was able to have a bed at Menorah Park, and that made all the difference. Menorah Park is a very special place, and so is the rabbi. And from the moment I got there, he'll speak to it. The rabbi had a bead on my mother, and I was so happy that somebody saw her. So I just want to tell you that the night my mom passed, my brother and I had 2 cots in her room. We slept in the room with her. She passed at 1:52 a.m. And 2 things happened. A lot of things happened. It was all handled so lovely, and my brother and I were there with my mother. And I just wanted to, there were people from another wing where my mother first began, called the Weinberg Pavilion. And people were coming down from the other wing that had met my mother several years earlier when she entered. 2 in the morning, and they're coming down because they heard Jeanne passed. And then just yesterday, Carl and I went back there to get her belongings. And a young lady named Vasha, who the rabbi knows, literally saw my brother and I. She felt so close to my mother and so enjoyed my mother that she didn't know she had passed. So last night I told Vasha I was going to mention her today. So I thank them. I thank you, Rabbi, for doing God's work. I loved my mother very, very much. She was a very complex woman. She was the life of the party. There's photos out there if you want to look. There's one of her dancing with Liza Minnelli at Studio 54. Wow. So she knew how to have fun. I'll close simply by telling you that I don't have the words to express the depths of the love I have for my mother. I can only do it in deeds. So I told my mother as she passed on to fly with the angels, as I said, or I told her that I would take in her courage, embody it, and persevere to achieve my goals. That's what I know she would like. Thank you all again for coming. I love you, Mom.
Tommy, such beautiful words. Words from the heart penetrate the heart. We now have the privilege of hearing from Aunt Barbara, yes, right.
Thank you very much. Well, I thank you all for coming. It's a tribute to my family, me and Louie, who was there with me every day I went. And thank you, Louie. You were a good brother-in-law. And thank my kids, because they are terrific. All of them. All of you. I love you very much. Anyways, all families have their dynamics, and our family was no different. I loved having my family around me, but Jeannie loved being free and independent. My mother loved combing her hair, but she hated it, whereas I liked the attention. My mother exerted control over my independent and willful sister, while Jeannie tried to comply. Her independent streak was always there, anxious to move away. Today on Christmas Eve is a very special time in my family's life. You see, my mother was born on Christmas Day, and every year my father would make the 25th an exceptional day for her. She felt as though the whole world was celebrating with her. My sister left Cleveland, but would often reluctantly return for my mother's birthday. Coming home resurfaced her tug of war with my mother's controlling manner. But when she was home, she and Louie would cook up a storm while I cleaned the kitchen and felt having my family together again. My sister and I would decorate the house for my mom's birthday with beautiful flowers, and Mom was so pleased and appreciative. One year, while Jeannie and I went shopping for groceries and flowers, we left our sons alone to clean up. They overloaded the dishwasher, and when we came back, we found soap bubbles pouring onto the floor of the kitchen. So today we are here as a family on this Christmas Eve. Jeannie is up in heaven just in time to celebrate our mother's birthday, which is ironic, along with Daddy and our loved ones that have passed on. In closing, I want to say that I love you all, and Mother, good luck combing Jeannie's hair. Jeannie, you followed your dreams. I'm glad you're home. Love you. Thank you. Now I have to get down. Okay, thank you. I know, I'm okay. Thank you, Rabbi. I'm okay. Thank you.
We had the privilege of seeing Bonnie and her husband family visiting all the time at Menorah Park, really engaging Jeannie, and allowing her to just blossom and break away from her handicaps. She just totally just shattered any handicaps that seemed to have been maybe imposed upon her. Her loved ones would come and keep her engaged, and they would the family would be around, and it meant such a difference. And I think I agree with Tommy, who said to me earlier, it really added years to her life. The fact that the family just came and she felt all that love and support, and I think the people at Menorah Park loved her very much too. So it's so meaningful, and it began at the beginning with me finding out about Carl. That's really the first one I heard about, because when I met your mom, Zichrona Livracha, her memory should be a blessing. I met Jeannie. We started to talk, and she's telling me about her son, that he's a writer, one of her boys, and she mentioned the name of the film, St. Elmo's Fire, right? Was that what it was? And then I start to say, wait a minute, when I was, like in yeshiva, I remember a beautiful song that used to come over the radio or in this supermarket. I started to sing it to her. She says, yes, yes, that's the one. And so from that point on, we hit it off. So it's going to be so meaningful to everyone also to hear as well from her son, Carl.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you all for being here. It means so much. Since Friday and my mother's passing, the world is a little quieter, okay, a lot quieter. Less funny, less bursting with talent, heart, and joie de vivre, which my mother certainly had. I know everybody has a mother, but my mother was completely unique. She was a singularly great lady who went her own way and celebrated intelligence and vision and compassion. No one who ever met her forgot her, as my brother had pointed out when we walked through Menorah Park. To what my brother said about acting, I found an old review of my mother from the early 60s when she was married to my father, and it was written by a guy named Dick Wooten in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And the headline was, or Cleveland Press, and the headline was, Jeanne Kurlander adds sparkle to the play. And it said that Jeanne is an actress who comes on strong, and it's her acting strength that carries the play. In a few years, last night's audience will not remember the play, but they will remember Miss Kurlander. And certainly they did, and so did everyone else. Sparkle is a wonderful word to describe my mother. She was born on Dysart Avenue in University Heights, Dysart Road, sorry. In 1935 to my Grandpa Jack and Grandma Gert. We've heard many tales that Frank Sinatra and Hoagie Carmichael would come and sing Aunt Barbara and my mother to sleep, because my grandfather was the president of the Phonographic Merchants Association, which was a fancy name for the Jukebox Association, which apparently had nothing to do with the Mafia of Cleveland. But that said, when Frank Sinatra came back here at one point, he thanked my Grandpa Jack, and my mother was exposed to all that early on. And she was a very pretty baby, and most of her life people would comment on how beautiful she was. But really what informed my mother was something else, and I wanted to tell you about that, because she always talked about a period in her puberty of 13 when she went through a struggle with her weight, and she was playing the violin, and she heard somebody at the bus stop call her Elephant. And my mother never forgot that, and she later had lost the weight and transformed into this beautiful butterfly, but she always looked deeper to people than their physical appearance and really saw the deeper side of them. My mother also said that in our family, every once in a while, someone on the family tree turns into a bush. So many of us are still struggling with that weight thing. But after she graduated Heights, as Tom said, she went to Wisconsin and Case Western, and eventually she came back to Cleveland because her parents couldn't handle her not being in Cleveland. They loved her so much. And there she met a young medical student, Don Kurlander. I've heard many stories, which my father, I'm sure, wants to block out, but apparently my mother pretended that her dog Lucky was sick and called him because he was a doctor, and he said, I don't treat dogs. What are you talking about? Eventually, she lured him to the house to make veal cutlets, which was her mother's recipe, which my mother felt really badly because apparently she'd done it wrong and they were very tough, but my father overlooked that, and somehow they got married and became the golden couple of the 50s, the beautiful actress and the up-and-coming doctor. My father ended up enrolling at the University of Chicago, where he did his residency, and that is where both my brother and I were born. One of my first memories was when my mother was playing Hermia at the Court Theater there, and these fairies would come and they would sit me on their laps. And I remember thinking how magical that was and how magical my mother was. She also, by the way, was there at the early days of Second City, and she ended up doing a play with the comedian David Steinberg, which she starred in with him, called The Hamlet of Stepney Green, which apparently is a Jewish version of Hamlet that the rabbi seems to know, so I'm dying to see that at some point. But my mother and father could have stayed in Chicago, but again, my Grandpa Jack and Grandma Gert could not handle not having Jeannie here, so they wheeled her back to Cleveland, where my mother did a lot of work with, she was on a children's show called Franz the Toy Maker, which I saw that I've looked at lately, which is really bizarre. And she also did some commercials with the comedian Tim Conway. And my mother wasn't just an actress. I really wanted to tell you more of what defined my mother. When I was in kindergarten, they told my mother that maybe they should hold me back because they thought that I was slow and maybe developmentally delayed. And my mother said to me that she told them that she was not convinced I wasn't slow, that in fact I was brilliant because I had tied string all around the apartment. And I never understood what my mother meant by that, but years later she explained that at the time my mother and father were going through a divorce. And I had tied this kite string between all the chairs and the dining room table and from room to room, and she interpreted that as me trying to keep my parents together. So my mother had this unusual way of looking at the world, which frankly saved me and informed everything that I ended up doing too. Sadly, though she had dreams of Broadway, she ended up divorcing my father and then marrying Richard Wechsler, the doctor from Pittsburgh. That actually inspired my first joke. I used to say that my mother was married to my father, a doctor in Cleveland, and then divorced him and married Richard, my doctor in Pittsburgh. My mother never gets divorced. She just gets referred to another husband. But so who knew you could make a living telling jokes, but that was my first one. For 2 years, Larry, his sister Ellen, and Richie, and my brother Tom, we were the real-life Brady Bunch. That is, if Carol Brady smoked pot and dressed terribly inappropriately. But that said, we had quite the blended family. And though Richard and that marriage didn't last long, they actually remained more than friends for many years afterwards. And my mother and Richard, it was difficult because they both loved each other, but they couldn't figure out how to be together. And I remember my mother would spend a lot of time playing four-handed bridge on her bed by herself, smoking Salem's and waiting for Richard to call. And my mother and I would try to talk to her imaginary partners. Hey, Madge, how are you doing? You look good today. And she'd just play her bridge. And then every once in a while, around midnight, she'd look up and she'd say something truly profound like, "Sons, in life there is the vaudevillians and the mundanes. And your father always thought that I was this wild actress, this vaudevillian, and that because he was a doctor who went to the same place every day, that he was a mundane. But the truth is, inside every vaudevillian is a mundane, and in every mundane is a vaudevillian." And then she would go back and play bridge. That was my mother, and it finally haunted her enough. There was a lot of stories about her. One of which, whenever she would drive carpool, my mother was notoriously late, so she'd show up 2 hours late to carpool, and then to make it up, she would take everyone to ice cream. So, of course, the parents would scream at her, "Oh, my God, you ruined their dinner." My mother got a kick out of that, apparently. And, I am grateful because I used to go to public school. I got beat up a lot, and my mother was the one who saw that I should go to private school, so I got transferred there, and I got to get beat up by richer kids. It was very fun. Eventually, my mother did end up, she gave me great material. Eventually, my mother decided that she had to go and act on her dream, and in a very difficult decision, she moved to New York. And my brother and I, at the time, were at a boarding school, but it was only 5 days a week, so we'd have to go to New York City or stay with some families, and one of them was the Nassifs, who owned the St. Elmo Hotel in Chautauqua, New York, where I was a bellhop and met a waitress who I became infatuated with. And today they call this stalking, but I ended up writing a 15-page short story about how much I loved her and mailed it to her, and that, of course, led to the movie St. Elmo's Fire. So if my mother hadn't left New York, Pittsburgh, I would never have met the Nassifs, worked at the St. Elmo Hotel, and had that career. And my mother always pointed out that sometimes it's your adversity that leads to your greatest triumphs, which is really a profound thing I've kept with me. I was so proud of my mother, as Tom was. He did mention that she was in this play, Animals. What he didn't mention is that my mother had to wear a duckbill during the play. And I didn't get to see it, Tom did. But, my mother was always so funny. And it may not have been funny that the play was full of animals, but my mother, I was so proud of her that she had done that. And the amazing thing about my mother is she wasn't stuck on, oh, this isn't working. Her apartment was going condo in New York, and she needed to make some more money. So she suddenly decided that she would become a commodities broker. And people try to say to her, Jeannie, that's a very complicated test, and there's very few women commodities brokers. You can't do this. But somehow, playing four-handed bridge and her math skills, she was able to take the commodities test, and she became a commodities broker at 50, and quite a good one, actually. She won many awards for selling soybeans and futures to people around the country. And strangely enough, not only did she get a cameo in the movie Wall Street, but that also led to my mother and I being on a reality show that was one of the first of the time. It was called 3,000 Miles, 21 Days, and 10 Cents, and they took away all your money and your credit cards, and you had to work your way across country. My friend was producing it, and he called me up and said, hey, would you like to go across country in this Yugo and work your way? I said, no. He said, well, you could go with Miss America. I said, oh, that'd be great. And we were about to start, and then he said, oh, wait, we got someone else to go with the beauty pageant. Well, you're going to go with your mother. And there are many things. I hope we can get a copy of that sometime, because my mother, immediately tried to pick up every cowboy and farmer as we were earning money. At one point, this is a totally true story, we were in Nebraska, or Iowa, I believe it was, and this farmer said, oh, he put us up in his tractor, and he said, you have such a nice smile. If you smile, I'll give you $100. So my mother smiled, and I couldn't believe it. He gave us $100, and then he invited us to dinner, where his wife then was a little different, and she said, oh, you can sleep over, and she suggested that we sleep outside in the park, which we ended up doing. By the way, later that farmer lost his wife, but ended up trying to propose to my mother, which she did not accept. So my mother had so many different stories that I could tell you. And in fact, I was once meeting with Dick Clark, if you know, who did American Bandstand, in his office, and he was telling me stories about the Beatles, and then I started telling him stories about my mother, and literally, right there, he cut a deal that was called A Show About Carl's Mother. But frankly, it was my fault. I could never fully capture my mother, and I feel that was some unfinished business there. But to skip ahead a little bit, because as you know, I could be here all day talking about my mother. But I did want to talk about the person who is also responsible for so many things. My mother really taught me to love original thinkers and people who do things differently. And I don't know about the whole redhead thing, because my wife swears she's Auburn. But I met Natalie on a plane, and I took her to New York to introduce my mother, and famously, my mother said in the first 2 minutes of meeting her, you're not good enough for my son, and when you have his baby, make sure you feed it healthy. So my mother was that contradiction. In fact, I was doing a project with Jackie Mason, and Natalie was so shaken, we went to the Carnegie Deli, and Jackie was there, and he said, why are you crying, plain girl? He called her a plain girl because I met her on the plane. And he goes, oh, his mother's crazy. I don't know. He goes, he's a Jewish mother. She's supposed to be that. So, frankly, Natalie really ended up leading to the love of my mother's life. Though my mother had a few husbands and more than a few boyfriends, really the person that she felt most connected to in the world was my daughter and Natalie's daughter, Campbell, her granddaughter. This despite the fact that when Campbell was born, Natalie swears Furby was a big craze, and my mother put a Furby in Campbell's crib, and Natalie swears that Grandma Jeannie liked the Furby better than Campbell, but that is not true. They went to Chautauqua, and they had wonderful times together, and they went to Disney World, and frankly, my mother was so proud in watching Campbell grow up and be a fine person. It's true that Campbell is acting, but she's also studying to be a child psychiatrist, and my mother really felt much more about who a person was than what they did. And so she just couldn't be more proud. And of course, my mother, though she never became the star perhaps she wanted, she did save some money, and that money is financing Campbell's gap year in New York and all the wonderful things that's happened there. So it's been really a blessing. My mother had an unorthodox way, and she somehow pulled all these people she met together as family, and that's why Phyllis and Larry are family to us, and my father and Lisa and Bonnie and the rabbi and the workers, and of course our cousins who we've gotten to know. It turns out my mother hated, she would never go to these geriatric homes. When she first started getting sick, I called the place, and she said, I'm not going there, it's just geriatric or senior, I'm not a senior. And I'm like, she said, find me some other place. So I looked in the phone book, and there were this rehabilitation of Palm Beach. And so she envisioned herself with all the drug addicts in a cool place. But then I found out the average age was 86. So my mother just, and eventually she had to go into the home because the diabetes got to her and some dementia. And I remember she was screaming at the woman saying, this is like Sartre's No Exit. I'm not coming. And she really lasted longer in Florida than we ever thought, but we had to bring her to Cleveland, which was a place that my mother had avoided her whole life. My mother used to say that people went to New York because they had a dream, and people went to California because they had a dream, but people went to Cleveland because, they got tired. But the truth of the matter is, Cleveland was always where she called home. And in this last chapter, my mother really found so much love and peace. And Lou and Barbara and our cousins, and frankly, my brother and I and Campbell and Natalie have so fell apart of Cleveland because we got to see my father and mother in the same city at the same time and realize how we're all connected and how beautiful that is. And my mother was never a judgmental person or holding a grudge, and so there was just a lot of love that came together. I did want to talk a couple incidents, and then I'll bring up the rabbi. One of which is when we first got here, I got her a limo, and we drove her from the airport, and then she didn't realize where she was going. And when she found out Menora Park, she was screaming and yelling, and I thought, I can't leave her here. They said, leave her. We've handled tough people before. But she kept screaming and screaming, and then I got a call later in the evening. I'm like, oh, my God, what did she do? And they said, well, your mother, she doesn't seem to get out of the wheelchair, but we didn't understand it. Somehow she got out of it, walked over to the staff refrigerator, and ate an entire jar of somebody's gefilte fish. My mother. I never really, I've worried about death my whole life, and I'm blessed that my father's still here, and my mother, we got a call a couple of days ago, and sadly, right after I heard about my father-in-law having difficult surgery, and I'm praying for my wife, Natalie, and it did not turn out well. And then I came here with my brother, and we waited, and she was unresponsive. Even though she had lost a lot of things, it was only 2 days she was unresponsive, and we stayed with her the whole time. And she did get to hear that Campbell had, she doesn't want to mention this, and we don't want to jinx anything, but Campbell apparently got to tell her that she had just got her first part in a Broadway workshop production that's coming up. And so there was a certain sense of symmetry about this. But also, while we were waiting for the end, we started watching Yankee Doodle Dandy, which my brother hadn't seen with Jimmy Cagney. And it's just so hard watching my mother struggling for her breath, and each breath was difficult, and we just didn't know when it would come, and it just felt like very, very hard. And then suddenly we heard, over there, over there, over there, the Yanks are coming. I don't sing, but anyway. And then the end flashed up, and my mother took her last breath. So she always had such timing. And as Tom said, all the people in Menora Park, so many people came up and said, we loved your mother. And I said, well, thank you, but what did you love about her? She was in a wheelchair, she had Parkinson's, you could hardly hear her. They said, oh, your mother, we'd come in and she'd say, get out! Turn off the light! And I said, that's why you loved her? She said, oh, we could tell, she was hysterical, we loved her. And people saw through that, and they saw the wisdom and the specialness of my mother. And that is something that I'm hoping that I will be able to keep with me every day, and that I hope that all of you who met her will know that life can be lived differently, that we all must find love somehow. That was ultimately what my mother believed in, and I just wanted to tell her and all of you how much I love my mother and how she will live inside all of us who met her. So thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you, Rabbi. It really means so much for you to be here, so thank you.
Thank you, Carly. Just to share a few thoughts from the residents at Menora Park, and really the amazing way that Jeanne came into Menora Park. Everything you heard is, we say, emes, true, completely true. I mean, when I met Mom, she was kind of upset something, when she was talking about Florida, something, she was very upset. And then I was so touched because in a short while, she adapted so well to Menora Park. And she became an important part of the whole community. And we would have gatherings, and there was a time that I heard about her boys, and I met Tommy. Tommy came with a friend about maybe 2-3 years ago, right, to Menora Park, and we got to meet, and he was doing good things, working on helping people. And then Carl, I talked with Carl, and Carl said, we're coming out with a documentary about Dr. Salkin, is it, who discovered the cure for polio. And I said, wow, that would be great. At Menora Park, people remember polio very well because, people my age, not as much. That would be very meaningful. And it was just a great moment for the entire facility. I mean, the whole auditorium filled up with people, and we got to watch the film. Carl was kind enough to come down and to answer all the questions from residents. It's really a powerful film if you haven't seen it, but the point where I just found myself crying when that nurse talks about going to the Iron Lung and seeing it was empty, that boy she had been working with. But the point was, she was just so proud of the family. And I think your dad was there for that. I think Dad came to that, if I recall correctly, as well. So, it was just a great time for all of us, how she would share and enlighten us. We were teaching about the Jews that were saved by Sugihara. Some of you may know of the Japanese diplomat who risked his life in Vilna in 1940 to issue visas against the will of the Japanese government to save thousands of Jews by sending them to Shanghai. Now, they needed to get to Shanghai, but they were never permitted to stay there. They had to have an end visa. And so they figured out a way to get an end visa to Curaçao, an island, a Dutch possession. And all of a sudden, Jeanne starts saying, I've been in Curaçao, let me tell you about it. And she starts telling us about the island and what it looked like and her visit there. And that was just another example of, she always involved in sharing of her life experience. There was the time that she was talking with her neighbor, Beverly Macher. Well, Beverly Macher today sends her condolences, one of the residents at Menora Park. And she found out Beverly's maiden name is Task. And Beverly also grew up on Dysart Street. And she had a brother, Task. I forget his first name. Huh? Barnett, right. Barnett Task. There you go. And then these two ladies are next to each other in Menora Park. And they were neighbors growing up. You just felt all of these divine coincidences all around you. And the family just rallied around her, and the place glowed from what I would always say was the twinkle in her eye, but you call the sparkle, I guess, and the kind of person she was. And she has imparted that to her children. You see today, Carl's involved in a nonprofit. He uses his art to better the world. Tommy also involved in causes for that, helping elderly with people with dementia, Alzheimer's. And we know that it's so important. Art can be used in multiple ways, and when you use it in a divine way, in a lofty way, it really sanctifies it. I don't believe it's a coincidence that she left us when the whole world was reading the Torah portion of Joseph and the brothers. Once a year we finish the whole Torah, and this week we read the story. We continued the story of Joseph and the brothers. Definitely the most colorful of all the stories in the Torah, and certainly talking about family dynamics that we all have, because we all are individuals and people, and we have to somehow get along with each other and be united, which you see in the story of Joseph and the brothers. And this family has really followed in her footsteps to do that so well. We're all individuals, yes, but we share a love, we share a peace, we share a unity, and it's a privilege to know the family, and a privilege to have known Yeta Rivka Bas Yaakov, right? Yeta Rivka, to know Jeanne, to have known her. Her memory will be a blessing. She'll always be remembered. May the Lord bless us that we should be able to elevate all of our traits and use them for good and spreading love and keeping unity. Their Menschlichkeit. You familiar with the word Menschlichkeit? That's what I see in this family. A strong trait of Menschlichkeit, which is such a great attribute to be a mensch. And I'm humbled and honored to know them. So We thank you. At this time, it's appropriate for us to say the Kel Mole prayer, which is a memorial prayer that is traditional. I'll recite the prayer in Hebrew and translate it in English. If you're able to rise, you may rise at this time. El Malei Rachamim, Shoichein Bamroimim, Hametzei Menucha Nechoino, Al Kanfei HaShechina, B'mahai Elois, Kedoshim U'Tehorim, Kizoyar Horokia Masirim, Es Nishmas, Yeter Rivke Bas Yaakov, Shehocha Lioilamo, Bavur Shanach Lemispalim Baras Koras Nishmasa, Began Eden Teimenuchasa, Lochein Valarachamim Yastire Besezek Rafav, Lioilamim, V'yitzror b'tzrarach hayim es nishmasa, Adonai hu nachalasa, V'sanuach b'shalom al mishkava, V'nohoi mar, Amen. Amen. I should have asked, we're still saying the prayer. The maiden name was Cohen and Abader. The father was Cohen. Was he in fact a Kohen? He was a priest, a Cohen. He was a Kohen. That means he was descended from Aaron, the high priest. So we're going to add that in the prayer. God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the sheltering wings of your presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and pure, who shine as the brightness of the firmament, to the soul of Yeter Rivka, the daughter of Yaakov the Kohen, who has gone to her world, and for whose memory we pray. May her rest be in paradise. May the Master of Compassion bring her under the cover of God's wings and bind her soul in the bond of life. May the Lord be her heritage, and may she rest on her resting place in peace. And let us respond, Amen. You may be seated. So a Bas Kohen is significant, the daughter of a Kohen. In fact, there was a scientist in Israel not long ago who went to the Western Wall on the Sukkot holiday and saw so many Kohanim, Jewish priests from all over the world. And he said, how could it be? There's a Yemenite Kohen. He looks so different than I do. I'm an Ashkenazic from Europe. And he went ahead and did research and found the gene that is passed from father to son. And he visited Israel at a time when Kohanim from all over the world come, around the Sukkot holiday. And he took gum samples, and he found at a 96% rate that they're all descended from one common ancestor from over 3,000 years ago. So the Kohanim have a great legacy and to the Jewish people, and it's a very significant lineage, of course. At this time, we want to acknowledge all those of you who came from near and far, and certainly Natalie, having come at such an unimaginable time, having lost her dear father, coming to pay credit to her mother-in-law, the great mitzvah, the commandment, honor thy father and mother. And they mentioned Larry and his wife, and everyone, all of you. The family appreciates it so dearly. At this time, we would call the pallbearers to come forward if they were.